Who lost the offseason? Who are the big risk takers? What are the biggest risks? Also, TSM, where you been? Not much news about TSM. We'll get into that more in quick news. LCS, where is the future of LCS looking? All of this and more in episode 147 of the Clown Fiesta podcast with Blue Jay and JNT 250. Jinther?
Quick little disclaimer. I'm recovering from being quite sick this past week, so I'll do my best to keep my sickness out of your guys' ears, but I apologize if it does come out.
He will do his best to mute. Okay, let's start with Team Liquid. I think that's obviously the place that we need to start with risk takers. Would you agree they are the biggest risk taker, JNT?
They are definitely taking a very big risk, and part of the reason why I say that is because now they have confirmed that their 2024 LCS roster is going to be Impact top lane, Umti in the jungle, APA remaining in the mid lane, Yon remaining in the bot lane as well with Core JJ. And while at first glance, you don't necessarily think this is a risky roster because one, it's quite similar to the roster that Team Liquid was running in 2023 that got them to the World Championship and they were a top team in the LCS. And while I think at a surface level, you can kind of make that argument, but at the same time, the composition of the team is completely different to what it was in 2023. In 2023, you had a very topside heavy map with Summit and Pioshik, who kind of basically had their own game plan for the early game in the first 10 to 15 minutes. Because from everyone watching Team Liquid games last year, the early game revolved around Summit. You basically were forced to play around top lane because of the pressure that Summit would exert in the lane. And now swapping back to, your more traditional stable laner and Impact, I think one, it's going to put a lot more pressure on the young carry players of APA and Yon than we had in the previous iteration of Team Liquid. And part of the reason why I say it's a big risk is the carry performers, when the moments truly mattered for Team Liquid, they more often than not kind of fell apart. And so I
Yeah,
think we're
I
really going to need
completely
to see
agree.
big improvements from both APA and Yon over the next 2 months moving into 2024 for me to have really a lot of confidence in this Team Liquid roster because they basically doubled down on Yon and APA as opposed to, some people just wanted to simply move on from them. I also think that you could have probably ran back a similar version of the roster from last year with very strong side lanes where you didn't have to have APA be the main carry and main focus of the team, but I think with a more passive top side, you're going to have to get something big from APA and Yon. And I think that's a big gamble to take moving into 2024.
Yeah, I look at this as a huge gamble, and for multiple reasons. One that you just mentioned, right? First of all, you're going to put the games in APA or Jan's hands more often. Now, I haven't looked at Umty's champion pool, so maybe he's a carry jungler. I don't know much about him, but obviously, without Summit, as you mentioned, yes, you're asking your young rookies to carry more games than they did before. That is a huge risk. You're going back with rookies that did not perform when games mattered most, as you mentioned. That is a big risk. And I have more questions that I think are also risks. Is what's the language of this team going to be speaking? Because we know that last year they were a Korean speaking roster. It did not pan out. Their mid laner did not know what the hell the rest of his teammates are saying. And now you still have four players on this 5-man roster that all speak Korean. Are we trying that again? Are we not trying that again? That's a question. And if they are doing that again, that is another risk. So it's like risk on top of risk on top of more risk. This is a huge risk. Um,
Here,
with
just
that,
not to interrupt or interject or
yeah,
anything,
go
but
ahead. Go
from
ahead.
what I know, Umti is actually a very good English speaking Korean player. I was
Okay.
looking at various posts when he was being rumored to go to Team Liquid, and then when it was not necessarily, well, I shouldn't say it was confirmed, but we got the Sheep Esports article and whatnot, and that's kind of our confirmation. And a lot of the commenters who watch a lot of Umti had to say that his English is actually very good. So I would presume, also considering the fact that you swapped out Summit for Impact, Impact obviously a very, he's an English speaking top laner at this point. I think this is going to be an English speaking team. And once again, part of the reason why it seems to me that they're doubling down on both APA and Yon, to where previously this team was communicating through, or presumably speaking Korean, and the carrying was mostly being done by Summit and Pioshik, whereas now it's the opposite.
Yeah, and I guess I should also reiterate that even if they did go the Korean speaking route, that Impact, Core JJ, and Yon all speak English. So it's not the same as last year. I don't want to paint it as the exact same, even if they went that route, because obviously those players can all communicate with APA, which was a big issue, I would have to imagine, this year. So that makes it a little bit different. As for the Umpty champion pool, I just pulled it up real quick, just from this year. This is just from summer. 9 games of Poppy, 8 games Sejuani, 7 games Vi, five Maokai, four Skarner. It doesn't look like he's a carry player per se. Now, maybe if I did a deeper into his champion pool all time, that might suggest, but you get the point. More recently, not been playing a role. So that is points more towards Jan and APA that are going to need to be carries.
Yeah, for the people who need an LCS type comparison, he seems more like an Smithy as opposed to a you know, your traditional carry and like a maybe a Broxa or something like that, to use Team Liquid as an example.
Yeah. Um, does this mean to you, do you think TL lost the offseason?
I mean, I have to say that they do, but I think part of that is going to be my own personal bias, just because I don't necessarily agree with the direction that they took the team. Um,
Right.
but I think you also have to compare it to some of the other rosters that we've seen being made. Cloud9, they're swinging big. They're going all in. They had the strongest parts of their roster from 2024 being Berserker and Blabber, and they paired them up with even stronger partners that were the best available options, probably in Vulcan and Jojo Pune. You look at FlyQuest, who's kind of still remaining on being a big spending team and bringing in a lot of very, very strong players. And you have, a couple of the other LCS teams that I think you can kind of put into the category of being developmental, but I think in the same time, they're doing a lot of great things when it comes to the rosters that they're making. I guess in this example, I'm kind of talking about your Shopify and your 100 Thieves. And then obviously you're going to have your bottom tier rosters and your Dignitas and Immortals who are kind of just throwing a bit of a mishmash of LCS veterans who can probably compete at a baseline level. But with Team Liquid, like I said, they're doubling down on the players that failed them in 2023, which is the most confusing part of that to me. And obviously, it means that internally the team has a lot of confidence. And I think, if anything, people who want to talk about NA talent and LCS teams prioritizing NA development over just re-signing, recycled veteran players, that this is a win for talent development in North America. So I'd say to that extent, it's a good thing, but to say that in the same time, like we kind of just saw these players fail a year ago, and I don't necessarily, I couldn't necessarily get behind running back a roster that's focused around them 1 year after are removed from a big failure.
So that is fair, and I honestly I wouldn't fault if Team Liquid fans are saying like I feel like this wasn't the roster we wanted, and I feel like we lost the offseason, especially because I'm this is just a guess. I'm guessing Team Liquid probably went after JoJo, seeing as if he was considering going to Live Sandbox, and maybe that was just for contract disputes, just to get a higher pay from C9. But I'm assuming since he speaks Korean, or is I guess I don't know if he speaks Korean. He is half Korean or something like that, or maybe I don't know. That he would fit on this roster as well,
Yeah.
right? He would be willing to fit the TLCK thing that they've been the name that they've kind of taken
I
by
have a new
themselves
name
last year.
for it now. It's sure it
What's
can.
that?
It's TL English. That's what it is.
Mm,
It's TL English
okay.
this time.
So if you look at it that way, maybe people are thinking, "Damn, we should have gone for Jojo Pion," and maybe C9 outbid them. Maybe Jojo didn't want to go to Team Liquid. That's all speculation, right? But from that angle, it feels like maybe we lost the offseason in that manner. Aside from that, because the Jojo Pion thing to Team Liquid would just be speculation as to whether they tried for him. I actually still like that they kept Jan and APA. And I want to focus this more on APA because I need to remind people. I know I've said it a million times, but I need to remind people the situation he was thrown into is not fair at all. He was thrown in very last second just for pretty much summer and is on a roster where he doesn't speak the same language. If they're going the English route and he can actually communicate with his teammates, doesn't that bode way more well? Like it feels like that is such a better opportunity, a real opportunity for him to actually get his real shot. I feel like the situation that he was thrown into doesn't really count as a real shot at the LCS. How do you feel about that?
It's hard to say because I think I both agree and disagree. I do agree from the stance that it wasn't, a perfect situation, and it's very difficult to judge, a player. We can't completely judge APA as a player just based on the limited time that we did see from him. But I think also in the same time, and I guess this is the part where I disagree, is he had some very, very, very clear issues and constraints that Team Liquid were forced to work around. Now, maybe Team Liquid identified that those constraints and those issues were ones that can be solved with a different roster and some time in the offseason. And if that's their
Yeah,
thought
time being for
process,
his champion pool,
yeah.
right? Like his champion pool was a big issue. Time helps with champion pool, you would
And if
have to
that's their
imagine.
thought process, I think that's kind of points to more towards, I can't necessarily disagree with Team Liquid's logic and their reasoning behind that roster building, but at the same time, there really wasn't a lot of moments that we saw last year where APA showed that he's going to be this kind of great player. Even on bad teams, but certain players, they can have performances and they can really showcase their skills even on losing teams. And you can see like, okay, this is what this player can become. Like he might just need the right circumstances, but I can see sort of a path towards, being a top player in their role. And just for me personally, I just never saw that out of APA last year. Apart from like the one Cassiopeia or one Ziggs games that he had where he played very, very well up until those things got permanently banned from him. Like there just really wasn't a lot of good things to ride home about APA, and I know that's a little unfair for me to say, but that's just the truth. Like just based off of the eye test, there really wasn't a whole lot of great things that we saw.
I want to add one more thing because you mentioned he had one or two good Casio slash Ziggs games, so that was definitely a part. But I also want to highlight that his Nico was huge in finding big team fight wins as well. Like I understand a lot of the times he looked like outclassed, especially on the world stage, and that is totally true. But I just need to also add that sometimes he was a really good team fighter, and so that's something that we can't take away from him as well. I guess one more thing actually. I am a big believer in giving opportunities to people that grind their ass off, and that is one thing that he is very well known for, is putting in the time and effort. He has not been playing pro for that long. I think a little bit more time could go a long way, and I'm really interested to revisit this conversation. I don't know, maybe after spring split or maybe by the end of summer next year, to see really if TL did lose the offseason, because I would not be surprised if him and Jan do find their footing and do actually perform really well in the league. I'm really really hoping for that to happen. And I guess time will tell, right? Because I just think if you're grinding, and that's usually the guys that it pays off in the long run. So I don't want to discount these two. I shouldn't call them rookies, but I want to call them rookies. Let's just say these young players, because I do think that time helps a lot with just getting your footing in this league.
I mean,
Before,
it will
go ahead.
only take time to tell. I think that this team could struggle within the first couple weeks, but I do feel like we'll get a pretty good read on this team a few months into the season. Obviously you can't really pretty much every single team coming into a new season, you can't really judge them off their first few games. But I think that give this team a couple months and we'll find out who they really are. And
Yeah.
sorry, I
Uh,
guess I should say sorry. One more thing.
that's okay. Yep.
We keep wanting to move on, but I have another thing to say. One thing that we talked about, I don't know if it was in our last episode or a couple episodes ago, when it comes to Team Liquid, if we thought that they were going to do the same thing with running back a very similar roster to last year, which they've now ended up doing, what is the backup plan? And is there a backup plan? Because that's a very important question.
So
Obviously,
the
Team
answer
Liquid
is
is one of
kind
the.
of yes,
Okay.
because Steve did announce last week on Hotline League that they actually are committing to an academy team or challenger, whatever the hell team. So they have to have some players in place rather than the teams that got rid of them completely.
Yeah, but
So that's
my
somebody
point
on there needs
here,
to be the backup
yeah,
plan.
my point here was going to be is that they need to get a suitable and LCS ready mid laner for that Team Liquid challenger role. I would hope and think.
Or
Like
AD carry?
both, yeah, both. I think more.
Yeah.
I'm much more worried about APA than I am Jan. I think I was actually one of the few people who really liked Jan in the early parts of 2023 when Team Liquid was really struggling because I thought that him and Core JJ were the best laning duo in the league.
In
Um,
spring especially, they were really good.
yeah, and when it comes to mid lane, I definitely want them to have some sort of mid laner on the back burner who is at least LCS level. I don't want them to see. I don't want them getting a developmental type mid laner for their challenger spot because that's going to pose no threat to APA and is really not going to provide any use should the team start to struggle, especially early on in the split.
Yeah. I want to get into what other teams took big risks because I think there's probably a ranking of which team comes next as to who took really big risks this offseason. Before we do, quick reminder, guys, hit that subscribe button. This could be our last episode of the year. We're not really sure yet, but you might not see us for another month or month and a half after this. So hit that subscribe button. Make sure that you get our videos recommended to you when we do start up again. It's the easiest. If you were like, how do I support these guys? I just want to help them. The easiest thing is just to subscribe, hit the like button, of course, and leave a comment. We always read the comments. Feel free to call us out on stuff we're getting wrong or if we're missing something. We use it as a call out section. Be sure to do that. And if this is our last episode of the year, just a huge thanks to everyone that's been listening and been supporting us over the year. It's been great. Help us grow our channel and hit that sub button. Now, other teams taking risks, Jinter. Who is next on the list? I got someone in mind, but I want to know who you think.
Who do I think you're thinking?
Sure, or who you think is the next in line as to like who took the biggest risks.
I mean, this is kind of like a small thing that we don't even probably need to talk about that much, but like Dignitas, they're kind of just doing they have one of the more random off seasons that I've seen in quite a long time. They re-sign Rich as like their marquee player whom they want to build around. And then they bring in like a rookie jungler with a random mid laner who has very little success in recent memories, and they don't even have a bot laner yet. So while I was initially a very big fan of Dig re-signing Rich for them to focus and build around him, they have yet to really do any of that.
Yeah, no, Dignitas is honestly a very random roster. It's not who I would have pinned as, um, taking risks per se. I had FlyQuest in mind, and kind of for the opposite reason of Team Liquid. Team Liquid, we looked at them and went, "Oh, you're running back the former rookies again that struggled quite a bit, especially when the games got really important." Looking at FlyQuest, I kind of say, "Oh, you're looking at a bunch of guys that were just on break, or even Jensen that didn't have such a good year, right? And you're still going with young players in the bot lane, just like Team Liquid. So
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is, if we're going to pin Team Liquid as this big risk, should FlyQuest also be thrown into the mix as well as like taking a big risk? Even though I think most people think this roster is going to be good, I could argue that this is a huge risk roster. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the bot lane especially, I think similar to how I was talking about Team Liquid, or I shouldn't say similar, kind of opposite to how I was talking about Team Liquid, because their previous players that they had on the 2023 roster in Pioshik and Summit were kind of the main, engine of the team. And now they have, Impact and Umti, who are definitely going to be more passive players. That puts the focus on AP and Yon. But I think in FlyQuest's case, they obviously have very, very strong players and solo laners in Jensen and Whippo. This is obviously under the assumption that Jensen is kind of going to return to some of his old form. Doesn't necessarily have to be top tier Jensen to what we've been seeing, but it just has to be, decently better than the Dignitas Jensen we got last year. But I think that that's going to alleviate a lot of the bot pressure that they might feel, considering both of them are such young players, and Massu, who's a pure rookie, and Busio only ever played 1 year. But I think, at least in FlyQuest's case, I have a lot more confidence in them being able to maybe avoid some of those rookie woes because they have a more powerhouse of a top side than comparing that to Team Liquid.
Yeah, yeah. Honestly, this roster again, think they should be good, but I wouldn't be surprised to see if they struggle. That would be another team for sure that has to go on the list of huge risks. I don't know if there's any other teams that you wanted to talk about as far as like if you think the risk or if there's any other teams you want to talk about. Period. I had one more in mind that I wanted to ask you if you look at the fudge thing as a risk that Cloud9 took. Is that a risk or is that the safe play?
I mean, it was the path of least resistance, basically. Obviously, all their attention in the offseason was focused on acquiring Jojopyun and probably acquiring Vulcan as well. They probably considered a bunch of different supports, but I assume that Vulcan coming back to C9 was priority number 2, right behind getting Jojopyun. But I mean, if
Yeah.
you've been listening to the show for the last month, I think the both of us have been saying that Cloud9 at least has to consider what the roster would look like without Fudge.
Yeah.
And if I had to guess, it feels like they didn't. Like they didn't even think about it or even consider making the change, because we got word of their contract extension. Both Blabber and Fudge extended their contracts. Or sorry, Blabber, Fudge, and Berserker all extended their contracts on C9. The announcements came quite recently, but in fact, it was updated on the global contract database like 3 or 4 weeks ago. Like, so that tells me that they just did that was also in their one of their top moves or first moves of the offseason was to resign all their players. So to me, that indicates that they never even considered replacing him, which I don't
I don't
know.
know if I would say that though,
I'm
because
unsure.
so one thing I want to throw into the conversation here is like, yes, they updated a while ago. We saw it on the contract database, but Cloud9 is kind of the domino team. Does that make sense? Like, and free agency starts a while ago, right? People start talking really early. This happens all the time, whereas like Worlds is still happening and discussions are going on about who's signing where and blah blah blah, and it's all just verbal handshakes. There's no actual ink on paper yet. But Cloud9's usually one of the first teams to make a move. So like, I guess what I'm saying is it's possible that they went for other top laners, but they just decided like, I think we're happy with Fudge, and they didn't consider. Not to mention, we
But
didn't know Licorice was available until a few days ago as well.
Fudge wasn't a free agent. That's the thing. He was originally under contract until 2024. So they,
Yeah.
even having him under contract for next year, they chose to stick with him. They also chose to renew his contract for 2 additional
Yes.
years.
Yeah.
That's the more damning thing, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I get that. I'm just saying that it's still possible that they did go look at an impact, for example, or licorice. Although the licorice thing is really weird because we licorice thought that he had a team, or that's at least the rumor that we have, that licorice thought he was playing on Golden Guardians, and then all of a sudden that plug got pulled pretty damn quickly, right?
Mhm.
Anything else on any other teams that you want to discuss?
Don't think so.
Okay, let's get to the downsizing part of the LCS. We suspected last week that there was a good chance this week we'd be talking about the LCS going down from 10 teams down to 8. And well, with that, Golden Guardians and Evil Geniuses, as you guys are all well aware, are now gone. Initial thoughts, Jinter.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, we both predicted that if the teams were going to decrease, it was going to be these 2 teams, and that was just purely based off the fact of the off-season activity. All the other
You know,
teams had most of their rosters figured out, whereas Golden Guardians had nobody, and EG just had basically promoted, players who were on their challengers roster. So it was basically like a bunch of non moves. So to see these 2 teams be the 2 teams that got axed from the LCS is not surprising whatsoever. The thing that is surprising to me, however, is the confidence that the majority of the community seems to have surrounding this whole situation. I understand that John Needham and the higher ups at Riot, they have no choice other than to pitch this idea as a good thing for the LCS moving forward because in their words, they have 2 partners who didn't want to be in the league now out of the league and obviously don't want people in the league who aren't going to be actively involved in the league. So that makes sense from the perspective of Golden Guardians and Evil Geniuses seemingly didn't want to be around, so they got axed. But guess what? These teams were around and were very involved in the last couple years leading up to their eventual exit. And there's been other teams that are still within the LCS that have been, not involved and very minimally involved for its entirety since they've been in the league, yet are still here. So while the word seems to be everybody's taking this, statement that every single LCS team was offered the opportunity to pull out from the LCS, and only 2 of those teams took that offer. Those 2 teams being Golden Guardians and Evil Geniuses, and the spin that Riot seems to be throwing towards this is that, well, all these other teams didn't want to pull out, so they all want to be here. And I would say they all want to be here until they don't want to be here, because that's what Golden Guardians and Evil Geniuses were. They were here. They got back. Golden Guardians actively got into the LCS when franchising came around. Evil Geniuses actively got into the LCS in between seasons 9 and 10, and they were around until they didn't want to be. And I think that's going to be the case for for the teams that are still in the LCS. They're going to be around until they don't want to be. So I'm
so
confused about this blind confidence in that all these other 8 teams are here in for the long haul no matter what.
so if I'm getting your interpretation of this correct, you think that the community sentiment and Riot sentiment is that this isn't such a bad thing, but you think it's far worse than people are making it out to be? Am I getting that right?
I just think that just because all these 8 teams gave their seal of approval that they want to be here for the foreseeable future doesn't mean
Mhm.
that they're not going to change their mind down the road. That's all that
Okay.
means.
Would you feel differently if it was the 2 teams that everyone's always wishing left, like Immortals and Dignitas? Would you feel like this is a lot more positive if that was the case?
Yeah, probably.
Because those teams have kind of I honestly I don't even know if we should throw Dig in the same category as Immortals. I feel like before this year that made more sense, but I feel like this year alone we saw Dignitas put in way more effort than Immortals did, or even just way more effort than Dignitas used to put in. But the point is, those are the two orgs that people always look at as being the ones that just don't really add much to the league. So if it was them leaving, then you think there's a good reason to feel optimistic about the change.
Yeah, I mean, what value is Immortals bringing to the LCS still to this day? Like,
Yeah, no,
what are
I
they
agree.
doing?
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that. I'm with you there. Um, if you'll allow me to cope, I don't think this is fake cope as well. I just want to highlight the good things as to why this actually might be a good thing, though. And we've talked about some of this before. The first one is the shorter broadcast. We talk all the time about how watching a 5 hour broadcast is a lot of League of Legends to ask people to watch, especially when it's during the week. We don't know if it's going to be on weekends or it's just still in the middle of the week again next split. But that is a lot of time. So that's an obvious plus, right? That we've talked about many times. There's the discussion about revenue split. Now, the revenue that the LCS gets, even though I'm sure it's going down, doesn't have to be divided through 10 teams. So that spot is more valuable to the teams that don't make a lot of money from this. Maybe if they do save some money from getting more of a split, maybe they could put more effort into, I don't know, whether it's content or social media or whatever the hell it is, right? You have more resources there, right? So there's a couple of things, even less fandom being split up, right? And I know we can laugh at the number of fans that EG and Golden Guardians may have had, because probably not much, but you could argue that the fans that did exist for those orgs can go amongst the other 8 teams, and there's less split of the fandom, right? So there's a few things that I think you can look at as positive. Are all of those just cope, Jinter, or do you think there's some validity to that?
I mean, the first one that I would just disagree with is the one where it talks about fandom. Like, I don't think that the fans of these teams are just going to naturally split themselves off into fans of other teams. Part of the reason why esports fandom is the way that it is because teams follow players. Individuals, they follow players, not teams.
Mm-hmm.
And for Golden Guardians, presumably a lot of the big reason why people were big fans of this team was because of the players that were on the team. And guess what? All the players that are on this team, all none of them are going to be on a roster now.
That
Like
was my next point.
the Licorice fans, like guess what? He's not on the team for spring of next year. He made an announcement. Stixay likely not going to have a team anymore. Gory not going to have a team anymore. Luckily, Huhi did find a team because now he's back on NRG. But 4 out of the 5 members, and 2 being fairly big North American players in Licorice and Stixay, they're not going to be on a team. So
Yeah.
I don't
So
expect those fans to just naturally glob on to another team or org. It's going to probably take some time.
Yeah, so my next point was going to be I would say that I would feel much more confident saying that that is a good thing if this announcement didn't come so last second. You mentioned all those players that don't have a team now. In the one Sheep article, it was probably LEC Wooloo, they mentioned that Golden Guardians was actually looking at Spica, Sven, and Licorice, right, to be on that roster. Those are 3 players that we haven't heard anything about yet, and those are big names,
Yeah.
right? So it's like maybe if this didn't happen so last second, it's not so bad. But because those players aren't going to other teams, yeah, that is a problem. And I think there's definitely a fair argument that those players aren't going to other teams. So that fandom from whether it be Golden Guardians or EG might not go to other teams because those players are no longer in the league. I think there's some validity to that. But you did mention that over time, maybe that gets fixed. Like maybe next split, those players do get back in the league. So there is a world where they do recover from this. I think a big problem with it was that it was so last second, and there's no time to I don't know, to fix some of these issues like losing all these good players. And by the way, it's not just those guys that we mentioned. Double If still doesn't have a team. We obviously know Santorin retired. Like there's a long list of very popular players that are no longer going to be in the league. That's going to hurt in the short term for sure, maybe in the long term as well if those players never get back to the league. So
I mean,
yeah,
I think if
definitely some reason to
anything,
be pessimistic about this new change.
I
Definitely some
think
reasons for
if
that.
anything, there's going to be a slight boost in the short term, like the first couple weeks of LCS 2024. But I'm kind of expecting like a little pop and then a big sort of decline as the spring season goes on. And hopefully, rosters get revamped potentially going into summer, and we see some of the more notable players that aren't on rosters getting picked up to rosters. And one thing that I think another thing that is definitely important to say is Riot didn't necessarily rule out teams potentially coming back there's a system. The way, if I understand this correctly, the way that the Valorant system works is a couple of the slots that they have in the VCT are kind of able to be teams are able to both kind of come and go from those slots. And I wonder if we see LCS implement a bit of a similar system where you kind of have, we're calling it these 8 permanent partners and the 8 teams that we have currently in the LCS plus other teams that can come in and come out sort of.
Yeah, and I haven't even gotten to some of the negative things about losing. Like, I mean, we've gotten to some of them, but I think there's more. Some of the things I wrote down real quick before we started the episode is like, teams jumping ship is a really bad look. So if they do eventually want to go back to 10 teams, is there any more, like, this is probably less of a reason to want to get into the league if you're seeing teams might just leave at any point. That's bad. Not to mention, does a brand want to get involved with a team knowing that the team might just drop at any second? That's another bad look. Um, what else was there? Oh, we did mention the fans leaving, and then yeah, okay, so that's pretty much all I wanted to say on that. Yeah, just the brands, I guess. But those are other things that I think need to be recognized about why this is like just bad. It looks really really bad on the league for
The
making such
LCS
a
has
sudden
been
change.
so volatile in the last 3 years that it can be so obvious to partners and sponsors and brands to be like, why would we get involved in this league when there's been so much change going on over the course of the last 3 years? Like, if I was an org or a brand or a sponsor, anything like that, like I'd be choosing any other league before I chose the LCS.
Yeah, yeah. You have to wonder like if that's maybe one of the reasons why teams are looking to drop is like they look at Valorant for example and they're like, oh, this is way better than what the
Oh,
LCS has going on. Why
exactly.
would I want to stay in
If I'm
League
gonna
of
get
Legends?
involved in North American esports, why am I getting involved in League when I can get involved in Valorant?
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely yeah. And if there's anything else that we're missing, guys, any positives or negatives from this change, feel free to let us know if we're missing something. That's what we got the comment section for. We'll read them. Overall, it makes me a little bit afraid, I have to admit, but I don't know about you, Jinter. I'm kind of getting used to this fear of the LCS struggling. It's uh, it's been a common theme for a few years now. Nothing new.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is we're kind of just now we're on the waiting list for how what the league is actually going to look like in 2024. We have no idea what the format of the league is going to be. Is there potential best of 3 coming back? What is you mentioned the broadcast? What is the broadcast going to look like? Is it just going to be straight up 4 games a day now, or who knows? I feel like there's still a lot of unknown going into 2024 where, like I said, there just seems to be this blind confidence that everything's going to be okay because we have 8 committed teams now.
Yeah, I won't be surprised if the league never goes back to 10 teams. I won't be surprised if like this it stays at 8. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. Um because you don't have to divide so much time up between the teams that are like less popular or just the ones that are gone there, right? The ones that no longer want to be around are gone. So like you don't have to put as much time, like the broadcast doesn't have to highlight those boring teams per se anymore. So that's, I guess that's a plus. And then the shorter broadcast, I feel like they'll like that as well. So there's a few reasons in my head that I could see the LCS being like, hey, 8 is kind of better. Let's just keep it like this. Um, the other thing that I wanted to ask you is, what do you think the LCS is going to look like in a few years? Do you think we're on pace for some big changes, or do you think that status quo is going to stay the same?
I mean, I think we'll see. I mean, obviously, we're gonna get a year of this 8 team, league at the very least, because the year is gonna have to play out as the year is gonna play out. There's not really a whole lot of changes that can be made to the larger scope of NA, you know, as a whole in League of Legends moving into next year. So if any like big changes were to get made, I would think it would have to be in between 2024 and 2025. And by big changes, who knows? It could we floated the idea of merger with LLA and CB LOL potentially. Best of 3, kind of as I mentioned. Like maybe we go back to that with multiple broadcast days on the weekdays instead of weekends. There was people talking. I remember seeing a couple random comments on Twitter and Reddit saying how like if we go back to weekend broadcasting time and it becomes like remote play because the Valorant people are in the studio on the weekends, and we shift back to weekends that have to be remote. And I don't know about anybody else, but remote LCS was so dog shit when COVID was
Yeah,
going
there
on.
was
Like
not a lot of people that like that at
there,
all.
there was nothing good to talk about those remote broadcasts, and that was unfortunately the way that it had to be because of what was going on in the world. So you can't blame them for that, but to actively do that instead of having it in studio, I think would be a huge mistake.
Yeah, even I remember the casters saying like it was way more difficult to get hyped for a cast when there was no one in the crowd to cast to. It felt like a lot of times that when they were casting, yes, they're casting to the Twitch and YouTube and whatever audience, but mostly you're casting to the people that are there in person as well. And so like that's one of the things that even though yes, that LCS arena was not full a lot of the time, there were still fans there, and that always made it easier for the casters. We've heard them say many times when COVID hit.
Yeah.
So yeah. Yeah, that's another issue. I do think that you're right. I think a lot of people have floated the idea that eventually we will merge with some of the other regions, some of the Americas, similar to something like Valorant has done. But we'll have to wait and see if the LCS is keen to do something like that as well. I remember a few years back we were talking about maybe merging with the LEC, and it looks a little silly looking back on that now. But
Yeah.
I guess we weren't. It wasn't that wrong, just wrong merger.
Yeah. Yeah.
Different kind of merger, perhaps. Yeah, we'll have to wait and see. The LEC is just not struggling nearly as much as the LCS is. I don't even know if I would consider the LEC struggling.
No, I mean I wouldn't consider
That's
it
a
struggling, and
that's a yeah, that's a whole nother discussion though. What's next, Jinter?
yeah, well, I mean, we were touching on it briefly earlier on, but a lot of the LCS rosters are pretty much final to this point. So I feel like we should pull up the rosters one last time. I've now just
Okay.
realized I forgot to fill in Castle on Immortals, but every
Hmm.
single roster except for the Dignitas one has been finished now. Dignitas does yet to have a bot lane, and even though there's a missing space in Immortals top lane section on my little image here, they did sign a top laner whose name is Castle, who previously played with Mask on whichever team that they were playing together in way back in the day.
Yeah. Um, I don't want to get into the power rankings of every single one or whatever. Maybe just real quick, we could just do like who you think are the strong rosters. Which ones have a shot at a championship? Let's just go with that.
I think the big three obviously is going to be C9, NRG, and FlyQuest. I think, excuse me, you kind of also have to throw Team Liquid in there. That they're definitely the most unknown. But if I had to pick one team that could be a bit of a dark horse, I think it could be Shopify.
Yeah.
I think that Boogie and Insanity will continue to be very, very good as they were last year. And if we see a similar level of play from Fakeout and Zazel to what we were seeing in the NACL days when they were on DSG winning the NACL, I think this roster could actually turn out to be pretty good.
Yeah, no, I agree. I like the roster a lot. What I'm so sad about, but I'm simultaneously happy, is the support position. I'm so glad Zazel is back. Chime having to put out that tweet that he's not going to be on a team, just that bothered me a lot. I think he is more than good enough to be a support in the LCS, and well, I guess he's not going to Dig. I don't know. Dig's probably got someone in mind that they're looking to sign, but by Chime's tweet, it looks like it's not going to be him.
I mean,
So I don't know.
it's gonna have to be an NA bot lane just because their import slots are used on Dove and Rich.
Hopefully Sven fills in that spot. Who else? Is there somebody else that we would want to see Doublelift? I doubt it.
There's
I could never see
no,
Doublelift going
no,
to Dignitas.
no way. I mean, the ones that I'm thinking of are like Wild Turtle, Stixay, Sven.
Yeah,
Sports could be Chime. Uh, who else? Who else is around?
I'm not remembering. There's probably someone big that we're missing.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I guess maybe Dignitas, if they do get a good bot lane, maybe they're a dark horse as well. It's hard to call them a dark horse without knowing two of the five of their roster. So
Yeah,
yeah. Um, and then, like you mentioned, I think TL, it's like you kind of can't ignore TL as well because there are some really good players on there. I mean, Impact and Core JJ alone have had a long history of being really fucking good in this league, even though maybe Core JJ not so much as of late. Still one of our better supports in the league, so can't completely discount them as well. Um,
I
any other
think.
things that you want to add?
Well, I don't know. Just looking at it right now, and there's only 8 teams. I think when the LCS actually starts up again, people are going to quickly realize it's going to feel quite empty. in terms of both teams, players, number of games. I'm telling you right now, I think people are in for a bit of a rude awakening in 2024.
What's so interesting about this is that I remember the discussion being had of if the league went down to 8 teams, then theoretically all the good players are more together now, right? They're less spread out amongst the other teams. But as we mentioned
Well,
earlier
the
in the
good,
episode,
most of the good players
it's
aren't on teams.
yeah, it just didn't happen.
Yeah.
It actually, like, there's so many that are missing, and I don't want to discount the players that we do have, right? Like, we're still more than lucky to have Blabber and JoJo on the same team. Like, that should be awesome. That should be a really good roster with Berserker and Vulcan. Like, Cloud9 is a stacked roster. We do have rosters that, I could feel really comfortable bringing to an international tournament and seeing how they do. Same thing with NRG. They just had a great year. Some people will argue they upgraded. So, like, it's not all doom and gloom. It's just like it was supposed to be. If we go down to 8, our roster should theoretically be better, and it doesn't feel like that happened.
Yeah, it did not feel like that at all.
One quick thing that I saw you added to our little agenda here that we didn't mention is that Golden Clue is supposed to be joining 100 Thieves as
Oh yeah.
coach. And I
Mhm.
like that. I like Golden Glue a lot. So that makes me feel good.
Yeah, he previously coached for 100 Thieves. Can't remember if it was their amateur team or their academy team, but that was before he then went to DSG as a coach. Now he's on 100 Thieves, reuniting with Meech at the very least because Meech was on DSG. So,
Yeah.
and he's a mid
Um
laner, so who knows? Maybe he's gonna help Quit out. Maybe he's gonna give him the Golden Glue buff,
yeah, that'd
get
be
him
sick.
swole or something.
Yeah, true. One last thought that I had. This was actually partially inspired by a Hotline League caller last week. That he basically, I'm paraphrasing, but he basically made the point that like Kelsey Moser's available and an Arrow is available. Like these are two people that are going to
Sign him
be
up.
really, they're going to be missed. And my original thought was actually the Jonathan thing that we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks. Now you've got Inero was GM, I think, this year, so
Yeah,
like
he
he
was
was
GM.
former coach. But theoretically, you've got Jonathan GM, Inero that could coach, and Kelsey that could be like your academy or whatever kind of coach, even just a regular
I think
coach. Like it
she
feels
was
like
the player development coach on Evil Geniuses.
yeah, she's got a long history of developing players. I feel like those are three people that if Immortals could just shift that way, I feel like Immortals would gain way more respect. Now, maybe we'll have to wait and see what Immortals brings to the table this year, but I point to them because they have such a long history of not bringing much to the table in the LCS. Wouldn't you think if any team went for those three people, that they would actually have a really significant shot of making more of a name for themselves?
Probably. I think any of the, quote unquote bottom teams would be wise to get any of those three individuals on their team.
Yeah. Not to mention all the players that we mentioned don't have a team. It's,
Yeah.
I'm almost making the argument that we need 10 teams in this league.
Kind of. But unfortunately, we didn't have 10 teams that want to spend for rosters.
Unfortunately, we don't. We'll do like a power rankings probably when we start our next episode, right? Our first episode of
Yeah.
next season. We could do a power rankings and something of that nature, though. JT is coughing. He's
All
sick.
good. All
We
good.
we warned you all.
I got the meat off in
Okay,
time.
let's speed run the other free agency quick news.
Yeah, we got some big free agency news elsewhere, more specifically out in LCK and LPL land. But yeah, we'll go through them quite quickly because there's a lot of news, but this is all some pretty big news. So listen up. First off, T1, they've re-signed their entire championship roster from last year into 2024. Now, I don't believe any of the details on the length of those contracts have been released yet, but we did know that both Zeus, Guma, and Keria were all on expiring contracts going into next season. So I would have to assume that they're probably in the tank for another 2 years at least.
Okay.
That'd be my best guess. But then, more importantly, Coma, their former coach, is actually now back on T1. I presume as the head coach, but it didn't specifically say.
Okay. What else we got?
Next up, Genji's roster is reportedly going to be Keen, Canyon, Chovy, Pays, and Lahens. Now, I don't know about you, but that's kind of a scary roster.
Yeah, it definitely is. We can touch on it in a second. Let's just get through this all. Let's speed
Okay.
run the whole thing. Yeah.
Next up, the Hama Life roster, shout out my Hama Life boys, is basically Genji 2.0. It's Doran, Peanut, Zeka, Viper, and Delight, which I'm very excited about. And then the
Okay.
D plus roster is going to be Kingan, Lucid, Showmaker, Aiming, and Kellen, with Showmaker having announced that he just signed a 3-year contract extension.
Yep.
Now, for some LPL stuff, JDG, they apparently have re-signed Kanavi, Ruler, and Missing. However, 369 is reportedly leaving to go back to Top Esports to go play with Jackie Love. Yeah, I feel like, should we stop there or should we keep going?
Yeah,
Because
that's fine. Let's stop there.
okay,
Okay, so out of all of those things, which one to you is the biggest standout as to like the biggest news?
well, putting my personal homo life bias aside, it's got to be T1 resigning the championship roster because I think that just immediately makes them the favorites going into 2024, whatever it may be. LCK, split winners, MSI winners, world favorites. I know it's very early to be talking about the world championship, but when the former world champions all are playing again on the same team moving into the next season, they obviously have to be the favorites. No.
Yeah, I think for sure that's the biggest like, oh damn, but like they got another shot. For me, that's just not a big surprise. So probably not for you either, or for most people. Like this team has been fucking good for the last 2 years. So for me, that's big news, of course. But I actually want to go to your Hanwha roster. Like this is a good roster, man. Like a
Dude,
very, very good roster.
they've
Doran, Peanut, Zeka, Viper, and Delight.
they've
Let's
never
go,
they've
man.
never been able to find a good support player to pair with the godly ADCs that they normally roll the bank out for, but I don't know how Gen G just dropped Delight like a piece of
Yeah,
garbage.
I don't get it either.
This dude was the best support in LCK last year, probably, like on like your traditional supports. Like this guy was the
Yeah,
best
because
traditional support player.
Carrier was an absolute monster when Worlds came around, but
Yeah.
Carrier, people were starting to talk about Carrier as like, oh, what happened to Carrier? He's no longer the best player in the world, and blah 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 blah.
Well, but I mean, even in the
Um,
spring split, when there was like still the early days of the double ADC bot lane, he was still shining in those moments. But when you talk about like just your traditional support player, like Delight was that player in the LCK in
yeah,
2023, and the fact that he was able to like we scooped him up to pair him up with Viper is like hot damn. Viper about to carry
yeah.
some games.
And then I guess the other big one, I think Gen G still has a really good freaking roster. I
Oh,
know that's not going to come as
Canyon
a big
Chovy.
surprise.
Oh my god.
I'm so sad to see Canyon leave D plus because like Canyon Showmaker, like I love those two guys playing together. But I mean, even Keen had such a good. Oh my god, he was so good this year, man. He's another one of my guys.
Yeah,
So, anyways, I
that
look at
KT
Gen G as
roster
being a
went quite
monster roster
boom,
too. Yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah, I know. But anyways, yeah, that roster looks pretty damn good as well. So, what else is new? LCK got powerhouses.
Yeah. Well, staying in the LCK, I know we talked very briefly last week about the LCK potentially importing Jojo Pune because there was a report about how Live Sandbox was interested in signing Jojo Pune and reportedly ran up the contract for C9 and were forced to pay more. Now, T1 Academy is apparently signing Rekkles to their team as their new support player. And I feel like
I
this
think this is
news came very out of left field for the majority of the community, and a lot of people were very surprised by it, myself included.
yeah, it's weird. Like I think it's cool, but like like because normally academy is for guys that you're going to promote, and it's like so you're not going to be promoting Reckless most likely to the main roster. I doubt it. So maybe it's like they got an 80 carry that going to work really well with Reckless. Who do we know who their academy 80 carry is?
I have no idea. I
Yeah, I don't
mean,
know either. It is odd though, isn't it?
it's very odd. I mean, pretty much exactly like you mentioned, the academy system, more specifically in the LCK, definitely acts as a vehicle for young players to improve and hone their skills so that they're ready to be promoted onto the main roster. We see this all the time. I mean, specifically with T1. Pretty much every single player that ends up playing on T1, I should say, not every player, every young player who ends up playing on T1 is brought up through their academy and trainee system. They rarely bring in young free agents. The only free agents that T1 normally brings from outside, other teams is veteran players. More often than not, junglers.
Yeah.
If it's not a jungler, it's very likely that T1's just going to be promoting some sort of young player into a starting role in on any given season, then signing a different player. So,
Yeah. And then the
uh,
last thing there is that Koi is renaming back to Rogue in 2024. Like, okay, cool.
yeah, they're back to being rogue.
Let's get to the other quick news stuff because we have some more relevant things to North America, perhaps. Jinter, you want to start us off?
Yeah, number one, what the hell going on with TSM? Where are they
Yeah,
at?
I've noticed rumblings lately about TSM and people going like, "There's no rumors about TSM. What's going on?" Few things to say on it. I guess the first thing is it just because they haven't joined a league yet doesn't mean it's impossible at this point. But there's a few things that I need to point out that TSM has a habit of like teasing things and then not delivering. So I don't think I would be surprised one way or another. They said that they're planning to join another league. If that happens, I won't be surprised. Maybe it'll be a merger with another team. But if they're not in any league, I also won't be surprised. There's a few reasons as to why. One, you have to find someone that's going to sell your spot to you. That's not always easy to make happen. Two, you need to make sure that if that team does want to sell to you, that the price is correct. And three, I would have to imagine there's probably a commissioner or somebody that is allowing the sale of a team to happen. If anybody has any information that would suggest otherwise, feel free to let me know. But I would guess this needs to be okayed by Riot or somebody at Riot or somebody at like the LCK or LPL, something along those lines needs to give the okay. And I wouldn't be surprised if TSM has left a bad taste in the mouth of Riot personnel because of how they basically did not really a lot to push their brand whatsoever in the LCS over the last few years, aside from just trying to win. Winning, it was like if you didn't win, there was really nothing around TSM. And obviously, we know that they hadn't been winning for some time. And we saw the TSM brand just kind of crumble. So, like, is that a team that you want to have in your league? Reggie has a history of abuse and there was investigations and he's on probation. Like there are reasons for commissioners or Riot to be like, no, I think we're good. So like all of those things combined means I'm not surprised if TSM doesn't end up in one of these leagues.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't be surprised either. I mean, the main thing that I just wonder from the TSM side of things is like, to a certain point, like, why would TSM even want to get back into League of Legends? Like, the more that I'm thinking about it, like, why would they want to get back into League? Unless they're going to be taking control of a premier team in another league, like, what is the purpose? Like, is TSM really going to be the team to like enter a league with a bottom tier, buying out a bottom tier, roster slash brand org, whatever it may be, and building their way back up? Like, if anything, I would just expect TSM to purchase like the best spot that they could find and then just roll with that and just slap the
Yeah.
TSM name brand on it. Like, I'm not expecting TSM to, you know, buy low and build this thing up. Like, I don't know. Like, I have no confidence that TSM is in it for the long haul. So I don't really understand why they would get back into the league in the first place. I think the more and more this drags on, the more and more that TSM themselves probably realize, like, why are we even doing this? Like, what is the point?
They want to win worlds. That's what they said anyways. I believe them. For the record, I do believe them that they want to win worlds. Just
Uh,
that is so much easier said than done.
don't know if I can buy that anymore.
Well, doesn't everyone want to win worlds?
I mean, yeah, but you need to be making decisions and doing things that are, actively in pursuit of that. And
Yeah, I
in the
agree.
back half of their time in the LCS, they were doing anything but that, by doing the
Yeah,
minimum in
and
terms of signing, players and building a roster. And you look at a team like Cloud9, go back to the teams in the LCS that we were just talking about who could potentially be the favorites going into next year. It's NRG, Cloud9, and FlyQuest. Cloud9 we had a good year last year. Guess what? They want to make it even better. They go sign a bunch of top players. Energy, they were the championship winning team. Guess what? They wanted to go find an upgrade for their roster. FlyQuest failed completely. Failed like the exact definition of the word failure. That was FlyQuest last year. Guess what? They are undeterred and they signed another pretty banging roster. Like that's what tells me a
I'm
team
with
wants to
you.
win. Not
I'm
TSM,
with
who,
you.
when the going got tough, they fucking just packed it in and were like, we're out of here. Here's
Could not
Kaiduo and
agree more.
Shen Yi.
I couldn't agree more. The argument from TSM side of things would be, well, we don't feel like we can win in North America, which is a fair argument. So that's why there was no reason to put in effort in North America and we go somewhere else and we try over. That would have to be, I'm guessing, what would be the argument from TSM side of things. But regardless, I do agree with you that they just folded like a tent as soon as the going got tough. So
Yeah.
yeah. What's next?
Next up, Champions Queue XD. It's a bit of a meme at this point, I think. Apparently, it's coming back. Not in the not
Yeah,
too near future, December to be exact. And they're making some changes. Number one is they're running it on Tournament Realm with the preseason changes. I don't even know when those are coming out, but I think they're coming out next patch cycle, which I guess would be in like a week, maybe a week and a half. And then there's also Duo Queue, which is good.
yep. Um, I'm happy that it's back. Do I think, oh, this is gonna save North America? Nope, I'm long past that now. Maybe I might have thought that a few years ago when they first pitched it. Um, I do think it's a good thing that you can allow duo queue. I think players have been asking forever for duo queue, so that's a good thing. You want to be able to play with your lane partner. That's all good. If there's anything that can get players to play more and practice more and grind before the season starts, I'm all for it. So that's positive. What I really want to talk about is I think Champions Queue should adopt something similar to what BoxBox does with his TFT tournaments. Do you know anything about this, Jinter?
Very minimal. I know that he runs some tournament and he invites a bunch of people.
Yeah, I honestly think that so I believe Champions Queue has always had like a prize pool, and I think that's cool and all. What I think would make Champions Queue more interesting is if you actually slowly, if people got slowly knocked out of the Champions Queue rank and up until I don't know, maybe it's top 10 or something like that. Basically, a point that like it's interesting watching the people that are like 40th or 50th on the list of rank to see if they get knocked out of it. Basically, how Box tournament works is you keep deleting a couple of players every time from the thing, and I think that would be really interesting to make Champions Queue more interesting. I think that there's probably better ways as well. There needs to be a little bit more effort put in just to make it that more people want to watch it. When I go to the LCS Twitter, there's not really much going on right now. I feel like now would be a really good time to start that and to actually plug it and make it more interesting and make more of a push for Champions Queue to be viewed by while the off season is going. And I don't think we really see much of that. So all this to say that I think more can be done with Champions Queue. Whether it's going to happen, I don't know. But I would like to see more of a push to market it and make it more interesting for the viewers, not just want to see the first person in the mega prize and everybody else gets nothing. I think make it more interesting. And I think it should be sponsored as well. I think they could probably find sponsors for Champions Queue, although I don't know if they've done that in the past or not.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I mean, I feel like there's a hard to say. I think Champions Queue, there just kind of just seems to be this some sorry. There just seems to be a very natural ebb and flow when it comes to Champions Queue. You know, there's periods of the year where it's going to get a lot of use, and then there's also periods of the year where it's not going to get a lot of use. And I think we just need to come and accept that, and that just needs to become the new reality. There's probably going to be portions of it where it's going to be completely dead and no one's going to be playing it, and we're just going to have to accept that. And then there's going to be other periods where it's going to see a lot of play for a 2 week to 1 month period of time. And I think with the when the idea of Champions League came out, it was supposed to be this thing that was going to happen year round, where it was just going to be a higher solo queue environment type of thing with better players and better communication, better coordination and whatnot. But I think it's just more just gonna have I think it's gonna be a windowed type thing. It's not gonna be something year round. It's gonna be something that's gonna be popping for 2 weeks to a month every couple of months.
Which is fine, honestly. To me, I think that's totally fine.
Yeah,
But
I do as well. I just
um,
think that there's probably things that they could do with it to help maybe kind of shift people and organize it better for that. I don't know. I don't know
agreed.
what that would be, but it's just I think the new reality that we'll have to accept.
Yeah. What else we got?
Well, if we want to talk about saving North America,
Hmm.
Exhibit A. NACL is apparently going best of three fearless draft format for 2024. Now, if people don't know what the hell we're talking about with the fearless draft mode, it means that once you play a champion, once one team plays a champion, that team can then no longer play that champion for the remainder of the series.
Yeah.
Which I
It
think
makes me.
Well, I just think it's
Sorry,
very,
go ahead.
very big news considering that everyone has loved this idea ever since its creation. And I know it's been adopted in the LDL, which is the, NACL of the LPL, basically, last year. I haven't really heard anything about how good or bad or successful it was over there. I haven't heard anything bad about it, so I presume it probably went well. So the fact that North America is adopting it, I think, is a good thing. And potentially, I would hope that this could be implemented in the LCS in the future.
That's what the hope is for most people, myself included. I think like whenever there's something that everyone's really asking for, try to find a way to make it happen. I get it's way easier said than done. You can't just poof and then it happens. But one thing I will say is it's probably easier to make best of threes happen in the LCS with less teams. Maybe that's one of the benefits of going down to 8 teams
I
is that
agree.
because it's more likely because if you did best of threes for 10 teams, then you got way too much broadcast time, right? So maybe that's one of the reasons why they're trying this now. They're going to see, hey, how does this work for Academy? And if it goes well, maybe they try to implement it for 2025, right? Who knows? That's something to be determined, but maybe that's something that brings a lot of interest to the league. We'll have to wait and see.
If it
Uh,
had to be, if LCS was going best of three, I feel like they just need to adopt the LCK, broadcast format. Just you run two best of threes every broadcast day, and you run 4 days a week, and that way you
Yeah.
every single team would play two best of threes in any given week. And I feel like, considering that we've already eliminated the weekend match plays from our system because Valorant has taken over the studios on the weekends, it just makes the perfect opportunity to run League 4 days during the weekday, during the week, and have it be best of three.
Yeah,
Seems
we'll have to.
to me personally feels like a bit of a no-brainer, but obviously there's more that goes into it in terms of how the broadcast operates. And well, now you're actually running the broadcast for an additional day because it's 4 days now instead of three and whatnot, and maybe that doesn't work. But in terms of the structure of the league, I feel like implementing the LCK format with 8 teams could work pretty nicely.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they ever get to that, and could be really cool. I also see that we got to talk about M&S,
He dropped a
the
little
Dunzo Manifesto.
manifesto. Yeah, that was funny.
Not the find, because we've seen manifestos in the past. I think CLG had some, and there's probably others that are getting. Maybe you could help that, but
I can't
M&S
I can't think
interesting.
of any others just apart from the original Dunzo manifesto that Link dropped way back in the day.
But there definitely has to be one that we're forgetting, right?
There probably is. I just can't think of it.
Yeah, me neither. Anyways, want to fill us in on just what went down?
Yeah, well, apparently MNS dropped like a bunch of comments on his time during North America and Cloud9 on some Korean forum page in the last week or so. Ranged from a number of different things, from NA players have zero work ethic to he didn't like the way certain players on his own team being Cloud9, were practicing and preparing during weeks. And I think two of the players that he kind of called out were Blabber and Fudge, saying that they don't practice as much as the other players. And I mean, a few other things in between that. There was some other players that he did praise. I think the ones he mentioned were Jojo Pune. Who else was it? Jojo Pune and two other players. He was talking about how like these are some of the best players in
Sven,
the
no?
LCS. Oh yeah, it was Ven.
I think he
Yeah,
praised Sven, I remember.
yeah. I think it was that in terms of like their work ethic and how they work very hard and whatnot. But it was much more bad than good, let's say, that he was talking about in this
Yeah,
thing. And obviously people, kind of were up in arms considering that he kind of just been kicked out of the league, and a lot of people viewed this as like sort of a petty, um, sort of statement as opposed to like actual like feedback on his time in the LCS.
yeah, it just to me, it feels like it's in poor taste because if you were doing this with the intentions of helping the league get better, knowing like, oh, you need to work harder, he could have simply done that by telling people that he thought needed to work harder. Like, hey, honestly, I think if you want to make this league better, you need to work hard. He could have said that to the people. Instead, he made it public, which to me just lines people to just get shit on by the community. That's all that does to me, I think. I don't know how you feel about it, but like, couldn't he have just easily gone to Fudge and say, hey, man, I don't think you work that hard, and I think you need to work harder. Is there anything wrong with doing that?
I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing it. I just think he came at it from a just the wrong perspective. I mean, I guess if anything, I don't think he really cared. I think he was just more of like, I'm done with this. Like, I'm never coming back to NA
Clearly.
and NA League of Legends. So like, let me just
This is burning bridge kind of stuff right here.
exactly like let me just drop all my thoughts on it. And then I guess there was obviously a big community backlash, and people kind of turned on MNS. But I just feel like you know what does it matter at this point? Like he's never coming back. Like
Yeah, no,
I don't
I
know.
have no problem with him feeling this way because like if that's his authentic feelings about certain players and how the leagues work, I have no problem if he feels like North America needs to work hard. That's he's totally allowed to have that opinion. I just think the way he went about it is just the wrong way, because I think it just leaves people to be shit on by the community if everyone gets the idea that these players don't work hard or whatever. If his intentions were to truly improve the league, he would have gone straight to those players and said, "Look, this is where you need to do this more, I believe, and this is what will make you better and ultimately the league better." I think the way he went about it just means that he's just trying to stir shit up, or maybe make it not look as bad on him because he didn't have the greatest performance over the course of the year. Like, it's just kind of like he's trying to save face. That's the perspective I get from this. So
Yeah, but I mean, in the same breath, like then people just basically just started unearthing his, his bodies or whatever, and talking about his time on JDXL and how he was like, abusing, drugs and alcohol while on the team, not showing up to team practice, showing up late, showing up drunk, whatever it was, or showing up hungover. So I
yeah,
feel like, I think he was just venting his frustration. I think that's all it was. I don't think that he was probably expecting this to be as big of a thing as it was. It turned on its head that way. And I think that's just what happens with North American, league. I think just the majority of stuff always gets blown out of proportion. And example number one would be the thing with M&S and Spearshot not too long ago that happened when they were boot camping for Worlds. So I don't
yeah.
know. I don't see it as like the biggest of deals, but obviously there's a couple interesting things that did come out of it, especially when it came to who he thought was, good or bad and worked hard or didn't work hard and whatnot.
Yeah. Anyways, don't expect to see MNS in the LCS ever again, or LEC for that matter, considering he is willing to call out anyone at any time.
Well, I mean, he announced his retirement. He was like, "I'm retiring. I'm going military service.
He's
Goodbye,"
going to
basically.
military. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, so
And
that's why
that
he will not be back.
fair on that guy. Like, I know
Okay.
I wasn't the biggest fan of him during his time on Cloud9, but it wasn't because of who he was. It was just more of his play, and
Yeah.
I don't really have anything bad to say about him.
Okay. And then I see we got Uzi on here. Likely done playing competitively. I did not read this or see this. Can you fill me in on what happened here?
Yeah, poor Uzi. He was apparently, there was a Reddit post about it. He was saying apparently on stream that he basically just doesn't have the drive and or motivation to play competitively anymore because he knows himself that he can't practice like he used to. He basically said that he's unable to practice the hours that, he used to be able to, and all the other players that currently practice do, and that he didn't, get any tryouts for any top LPL teams, and that he's basically just come to accept that his time in professional League of Legends is over, which is
Yeah.
honestly it was kind of sad. Like for me personally, like I was never the biggest like Uzi fan when it came to like propping him up as like one of the best players of all time. Like obviously I recognize Uzi's a very, very good player. Don't get me wrong. He was obviously in the World Championship 2 separate times, 2 years in a row, season 3, season 4, never won the Summoners Cup, but obviously was up until season 8 or 9, basically, before the new wave of young players kind of came into effect. Uzi was probably number 2 all time behind Faker, or at least close there. Most people would say.
Yeah, for a
And
while he was.
yeah,
Not so much anymore, but definitely for a
the
while.
fact that it's all done now is it's kind of sad. It's the nostalgia of my old leagueness is hitting a little bit.
It's a reminder that not all of the great players that play the game get to win a championship. That's true in any sport. There's a bunch of guys that are clearly good enough at some point to win a championship but never make it. And that's why I think it's sad, is that it's coming to an end where it's like Deft, for example, got to get that closure, even though he's still playing and he's coming back.
The
Deft, we could all know
last dance.
he'll be able to, but we know that Deft will be able to retire with a championship under his belt. You know what I mean? Whereas like Uzi, you could argue that was just as good as Def at one point in his career and is not going to get that. So that's why I think it's sad. It's because this is a guy that could have definitely been a world champion and never got there. And it's like it's closing that chapter for one of the most popular players that we've ever had in the game.
Yeah, there's always going to be other players that stand in their way and prevent them from getting that. You know,
Yeah.
we see it all the time, and Faker will forever be the. I guess Uzi will forever be in Faker's shadow, basically.
Yep. More LPL stuff. I see Dom is on here.
Yeah, I will dominate. Well, last week we talked about how Monty dropped a bit of a bomb saying that there was likely going to be no LPL English broadcast for the spring 2024 split in the LPL. And I Will Dominate has basically come to their rescue to say that he is going to be running his own LPL English broadcast. And he kind of left this very open-ended because it was more him saying how, his personal channel, his stream, his life has now kind of become revolved around the LPL, as that's the main league that he watches. I think, obviously he's got like a huge fandom for OMG and whatnot, but that's, the majority of I Will Dominate's content has now become LPL focused over the course of the last 3 years, and he basically recognizes that this is what makes him successful. So the fact that the English broadcast could possibly be ending, he's kind of recognized that, both for the love of the game and the teams and the players itself, he wants to be involved in that, but also for all the other people who've been involved in the LPL English broadcast for so many years, like they're all going to be out of a job as well. So sounds like
Yeah.
he just wants this to continue, not only for himself but for everyone else involved, which I think is just a very admirable thing what he's doing.
Yeah, this is a huge opportunity for him. I don't want to make it sound like this is all good news because there's like you said, there's a lot of people that are going to be losing their job over this, especially like the casters and whatnot. I'm sure he's going to do what he can to pick up the pieces. This is going to be a really big project, I would have to imagine for him, and I hope that he has a lot of success with it because you mentioned he has put in so much time into the LPL product, and he is one of the reasons that there is popularity around that league from our side of the world, right? Sure, there would be LPL fans without Dom, but there's a lot more because of Dom. So I don't know. I just think it's a cool thing, and I hope that this opportunity is a success for him.
Yeah, I mean,
Honestly,
he,
I hope
he
that he
left
can make
it
something good out of it.
he left it very open-ended, basically saying like, I don't know how this is going to happen, how it's going to work, but
Right.
I'm going to do whatever I can to make sure that this sticks around next year, which is
Yeah, even though I say it's a huge opportunity for him because I think this will probably help his brand a lot, it's a big project and it's not going to be easy. So it is like yeah, I don't know. It's a good thing for him, but it's also a really difficult thing for him. And yeah, he's going to put in a lot of time. Wish him nothing but the best.
and people who watch this or listen to this podcast know, like, we're not necessarily the biggest I Will Dominate fans in the world, but at the same time, we can't not recognize the dedication and the commitment that he's had to this league and this scene for this number of
100%.
years, especially in the last 4 years, ever since co-streaming has become, as big as it has been.
Yep. Couldn't agree more.
Wishing this whole situation the best and whatnot. Hopefully, he can save the broadcast.
It'll be interesting to see what he can make out of it. And I'm sure he'll have help along the way, or at least I hope he does. I have a hard time imagining that he's going to be doing this all on his own. I don't think that would be
Hmm.
likely. Last thing, we got 2024 changes. What do you want to talk about with this, Jinter?
I don't know. I just figured we throw it in there just because obviously they're changing the map, new champion, they're removing mythic items. We're gonna get a very new League of Legends moving into 2024. I think normally people are usually quite annoyed that there's not a lot of big changes that happen in between the off season from sort of one season to the next, because especially in professional play, the meta can usually develop quite slowly from uh, the end of summer to the beginning of spring. But I think that especially with these 2024 changes, both map items and whatnot, I think it's going to create some big changes in pro play, especially the map changes.
Okay, so I was going to ask you, which one do you think is the biggest, or the like the change that you like the most? I guess which one is the most impactful?
The map change, 100%. The
Map.
map definitely
I
needed an
wonder.
update, and we've basically been using the same map for almost 10 years at this, or I guess almost 9 years at this point. Obviously, there's been some very slight map adjustments, like alcoves and a couple bushes and whatnot, but I don't really count those as like those are just like little add-ons. But this is like a map overhaul basically, and I think it's going to be very exciting, because I think in certain aspects of League, like the map is like the map itself was a bit broken. Like
I would also need to shout out the dragon because like dragon maps have been a thing, right? So don't forget that that has been an adaptation to the map technically, although very minimal, with it
yeah,
being like cloud map or whatever. Like there's some small things there.
yeah, I think those I'll also kind of throw in as like, little add-ons, because the map itself still functions exactly the same. Like it doesn't really change a whole lot. Yeah, there's like very slight changes, but it doesn't change the overall way of how the game is played.
I think so. I agree that I think the map changes are really good. I think they all look really, really cool and whatnot. The Baron looks beast and all that stuff. I would argue that the getting rid of the mythic items is a big thing because I don't know from your perspective, but from my perspective, all I've heard is that people do mythic items whatsoever. And so I think even though the map changes, I
You
think are
kind
going to
of
be really
sorry,
popular.
you kind of cut out there. Can you restart from
Yep, no problem.
your initial point?
I was saying that I think the mythic items changes is going to be really important because I think even though people will love the map changes, I think people have been complaining about mythic items for a long time now. So I actually think the biggest thing is getting rid of the mythic items because I've heard nothing but complaints about those.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that as well. I just think that specifically when it comes to pro play, obviously the map's going to be the most impactful thing.
Okay.
But I mean,
Nothing else for me.
I'm in
Anything?
that camp as well. Mythic items are just a completely garbage system.
Yeah, and it'll change how the game's played a lot, I have to imagine. We'll have to wait and see. I'm trying to think
Yeah.
of like the way things used to work. It's been so much time now because mythic items have been around for a while, but I would have to imagine the game changes significantly because of that. And I think the player base is going to be quite happy with it. But that's all I've got for this episode, Jinter. Is there anything else that you wanted to add?
That's all I got. I mean, unless oh, final
Okay.
check, make sure there's nothing new. But yeah,
Yeah, you do
that's
a
about
quick
it.
yeah, do a quick sweep of Reddit or whatever you want to do. I'm just gonna say that want to shout out everyone one more time. This year has been great for us. We've a lot of new viewers, a lot of people discussing with us Discord over the year, a lot of people, you know, I think we need to shout out because I think you guys have been great and we've had a lot of fun doing the podcast this year. This doesn't necessarily mean for sure it's our last episode this year, but as likely is. We'll see if anything big happens, then we'll obviously have an episode. Just huge shout out to everyone. We will be back for next year. Last year, I think we started our first episode mid January. Gonna aim for that. So we
I
will
think
be
it was
back
the
again.
second
Remember,
week of January, basically.
okay. So just be subscribed so that when we do start episodes again, you'll be ready to get them in your feed. And yeah, we're looking forward to seeing what the changes are for the LCS if there are more to come. Looking forward to see what next year looks like. It's definitely going to be different with 8 teams. Who the hell knows what's going to happen? But yeah, looking forward to it. And anything else you want to add, Jinter?
No, just once again, I mean, thanks everybody who's comes back on a weekly basis to listen to us, chit chat about the LCS and league and whatnot. I don't think that, when we started this podcast, 3.5 years ago, that we thought we'd be doing this still, and
I
we just thought it was
remember
something fun that we were just gonna do to kill some time during COVID, and
I remember we had the conversation before we started this podcast, like, we're gonna be doing this for a long time with just no one listening. And we went, yeah, oh, okay, fine. At least we'll get to talk about League of Legends.
yeah.
And now we get to do it with people in our audience. And I just think that's so cool, even if it is a small audience. We appreciate you all. And yeah, that's it. We'll see you guys next time we see you. This has been episode 147 of the Clown Fiesta podcast. Take care.